The world of nutrition science needs a paradigm shift. I've talked about Thomas Kuhn's A Theory of Scientific Revolutions before. If you're not familiar with it, it is a work I read in grad school and one of the very, very few books I kept for my personal library after I finished both my master's and PhD program. It's a book that, if you are concerned with anything touching on science, social science, natural sciences, the physical sciences, medical science, anything, it's a book you should read. Its subject is essentially how scientific revolutions happen and how, because of a scientific revolution being the focus of it, how then the new scientific orthodoxy happens. To compare this to what we're told is how scientific progress and scientific orthodoxy is established, you get two different stories. The classic story you get from people is that, well, there was a great dark age, which is historically not even true anyway. But what you have is a story of a great dark age where then there was a great enlightenment and everybody was free from the shackles of superstition and the rest to do their scientific research. It's funny, and you only believe it if you don't know much about history. But the actual truth of scientific revolutions is this. The scientific world has had a series of these paradigm shifts where a ruling orthodoxy about science from the scientific authorities themselves, who did the most heinous kind of gatekeeping themselves, kept progress standing still for a long time, believing a lot of pseudo-scientific nonsense, until finally the evidence about the new emerging ideas was too good to be passed up anymore. They couldn't ignore the new evidence about whatever it was they were talking about at the time, and there was a shift when the evidence just became too overwhelming and a new scientific orthodoxy was established. Thomas Kuhn in the book uses rather classically the example of something called, I think, phlogiston or something. I can't even pronounce it, but it was the old scientific idea of the physical substance of fire. Now you might be thinking, fire is physical substance? Fire doesn't have physical substance, it's a chemical reaction, yada, yada, yada. Yes, and for centuries, the scientific community would tell you that fire had a physical substance. They were trying to figure out how to capture the physical substance of fire. If they could figure out how to capture the physical substance of fire, they reasoned that the great question of energy had been going on for centuries before electricity was discovered, could be solved. And if you were a scientist who didn't believe that there was a physical substance to fire, you were considered a loon. The doors to scientific research and funding and all the rest of it were closed to you. Does that sound familiar to you? It should. It is exactly what happens now in a whole host of areas touching on the question of food, which is the subject of this channel after all. We need a paradigm shift in nutrition. We need a paradigm shift in nutrition-related medicine. We need a paradigm shift in exercise science. We need a paradigm shift in environmental science. All of these things desperately need a paradigm shift because the current scientific orthodoxy doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It's just supported by system money right now. But eventually, assuming the avenues of information remain relatively free, that will change. A paradigm is the ruling idea system in science, and it can last for centuries. We don't tend to be in a period of history where things last centuries, so my hope is that won't be the case here. But a scientific revolution in this case would be a paradigm shift from the saturated fat is bad, plant-based good, plant-based Mediterranean diet good, red meat bad stuff, and the animals that are raised for the production of red meats and saturated fats are bad for the planet and all the rest, everything that touches on that, and that the way to take care of this stuff is to have an expensive chemical given to a person, possibly for the rest of their life. My hope, my goal is to do my tiny, tiny, tiny little insignificant part here to help push that paradigm shift towards something new. And you see this in organizations starting up like Rivero and a few others that believe that a nutrition-based approach to food, to questions about food and dietary health, is the proper way to go. So yes, we need a paradigm shift. We need one in environmental science. We need one in nutrition science, medical science, all of it. Everything that the carnivore, keto world, the nutrition world touches on. Because we're convinced here that there is a spectrum of a proper human diet. And right now, the vast majority of people don't even have the ability to do it. Not because they can't go to the grocery store today and buy nothing but ground beef or ribeyes or whatever is culturally appropriate in their neck of the woods. Their problem is they're not capable of doing it. Because if you tell them, I haven't eaten a vegetable in 2 years, they look at you like you are a walking corpse. That it's just a matter of time before your decisions catch up with you. If you tell them that a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet is the way most human beings should be eating most of the time, they will tell you that that is not what the food science says, that we should trust the experts. And the experts say, eat less red meat, and less red meat, and less red meat. And less red meat over and over again until we get to no red meat. That's what they want. When it looks like human ancestors ate predominantly red meat, that we have the teeth for it, that our brains grew when we began to cook it even slightly, that our brains grew for hunting purposes. That is the scientific orthodoxy. Perhaps we need a paradigm shift there too, though. If you haven't read Thomas Kuhn's A Theory of Scientific Revolutions, this is the second time I've brought his book up on my channel. I really suggest you go find a copy. It has been the most widely read book in colleges, pretty much, right up there with like Plato's Republic and Shakespeare and a few other things, for decades, since the early 1960s when it was first published. You can easily find used copies of it on Amazon, or you're probably at a college bookstore or something. They're out there. Any website that sells used books, you should be able to find a copy if you want. It goes over this concept. It was required reading in my entry-level master's degree class, and then that same class was required for PhD students again in my program, but I had already taken it, so I didn't need to reread it again. But it's available. Millions of copies of this thing have to be out there. I recommend it. Highly, highly recommend it. It will help you understand, I think, and just what it is we're dealing and how entrenched the current nonsensical food system really truly is. Let me know if you've read this in the comments, please. If you want to read it, it's again a college level reading book, so it's worth reading, but it's also you have to engage with it. But there should be interviews with Thomas Kuhn available on YouTube for your viewing pleasure if you wish. But let me know if this sounds like an interesting subject to you, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. As to sharing this on social media, that helps a lot too. I am Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore. Thanks for tuning in today.